Me, a bro.
Yep.
He, a dude.
That's good stuff. All right. Let's try it. Okay. Welcome to the We Will Journey podcast. We're talking about faith and life as it happens, and not the glossy exterior we wish it was.
Oh.
What, man? What did I do wrong?
I think you said it's because all the things I was thinking about before. But we can edit that. You got that part good.
Oh.
You got it good. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Okay, just...
Now it's your turn.
Good.
Yeah.
Wait. We're going to get under the surface. I should have said all those things before. We should have waited down and dirty until after we read this part.
Okay.
Okay. Wait. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty. Okay. Maybe we should. It doesn't have to be word for word, right?
No. I mean, I gave an interpretation.
Okay. All right. We get under the surface and explore the down and dirty of life as it pertains to our beliefs, our relationships, politics, and absolutely everything else.
Oh, there we go. That was good. All right.
When I'm dead, laying in my coffin, all my friends all gather round. They can say I'm just sleeping good alone, the sweet peace I have found.
3, 2, 1.
Hello, Scout.
Hello.
Welcome to our podcast, and thank you for being willing to fill in for Seth as he is gone. So I want to introduce you a little bit to our huge audience, so they know who we're talking about. But you are Scout Wilson.
Yes, sir.
You have a background in philosophy. Would you like to talk about that just a little bit? Tell us about your background, and we're going to talk about, this is going to be part 3 of consciousness and embodiment. And so we're going to kind of dial in on the embodiment part, specifically in the area of culture today. So, but tell us about you first.
Yeah, so I'm Scout. My background, I guess you could say, is in philosophy.
Yeah.
Mainly ancient Greek, though I don't know ancient Greek.
Okay.
So I read just translations. But
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah.
that sort of school of thought,
Yeah.
which kind of delves into everything,
Right.
from politics to ethics to science,
Yeah.
logic,
Yep.
art, everything.
Okay.
Beauty, goodness, and truth.
Yep. So who have you studied in particular? Like, who would be some of the people we might know?
In particular, Plato
Yep.
and his account of Socrates, Aristotle. Those are my main guys right there.
Okay. I've never heard of them, but they sound cool.
Yeah, they've got cool names.
Yeah, they've got cool names.
Yeah. Most Greeks do, ancient Greeks.
I'll Google them and see if there's anything. Would I even be able to find anything online about either one of those three?
Yeah, very little.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You'd
Okay.
find plenty of.
Yeah.
Too much.
Okay.
Too much. Yeah.
All right.
Probably too much.
All right. Yeah. So.
But primarily, I've just read like their texts.
Right.
Right. So a lot of times, you in school or in different schools, you'll end up reading texts about texts.
I've done a lot of that.
Yeah. And the way I was taught philosophy, the way I did it was you read the primary texts. And
Right.
you deal with the ideas that they're talking about.
Right.
So you're really engaged with them.
Yeah. So that would be, like, in my world, typically when you go to graduate school, like for your Master of Divinity, for example, what I've done is I've read texts about theologians, but typically then in graduate school, then you just read, like you did, directly about their work, those theologians' work, and
Yeah.
and so that's what you did at graduate school with
Right. But not about their work.
philosophers. You read their work.
You read their work.
Yeah, you read it, but not in Greek.
Not in Greek.
Yeah,
If I was a better ancient Greek philosopher, I would know Greek.
you would know Greek.
And I would be reading it in the original language.
So that would be like another step if you wanted to.
That would be another step, yeah.
Learning Greek.
Right.
Yeah.
It'd be like reading the Bible in Greek or Hebrew.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
We can still get a lot and glean a lot from translations.
Yeah.
But you have to be wary of sort of that second layer.
Well, there's entire books that just do a lot of translation for biblical text. So a lot of the big words. I even have a Bible that basically all the keywords in every sentence, they have definitions and a context that I can look into to see what the original Greek or Hebrew was and what the meaning was and other places that it's used and how it's used and those kind of things. So I assume all of that exists for your philosophy as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and we're dealing with a similar language. We're both dealing with Greek.
Yeah.
There's different types of Greek. But anyway, Greek was a language that some words really embodied a lot of things, a lot of ideas, and you had to be very particular about pointing out what was meant, right? And translators had to figure that out too.
Right.
And so that's important for reading translations. It's like, well, they translated this word into goodness here or justice, but it can also mean this, but it makes sense to mean what it does here. But at the same time, there are instances where there could be a double meaning of something. Like there's sort of an immediate context and we can sort of understand what's being said about it there. But then it can be applied further than that because this Greek word actually has another meaning that they're also employing. Right? But you can't use both words in a translation in English necessarily. I mean, you could have like a word and then slash another word, but then that would be confusing to read a translation that way. Yeah. So sometimes there's footnotes and things like that.
Right.
To point those out.
Would that be similar to like in a biblical context, we talk about both and, or it kind of has a dual meaning. So it could be like then at the time that it was written for that audience, but then it could also have some future meaning too. That's a little different than what you're talking about, I know, but
you're talking like contemporary versus like a contemporary meaning.
Well, that would be like an
original meaning.
Well, no, it would have like your original audience, and then it could also be like eschatology too. Oh, okay. Yeah. So future, already not yet type stuff. So,
kind of similar.
Can have two meanings, basically, is what I'm kind of getting at. Yeah. Well, the other day, Scout, so I'm a lucky person because you and we get to hang out quite a bit. Every time I'm here in town, we normally grab a meal or two, hang out some, and I get to talk to you about all kinds of things, whatever's on my mind. I get to ask you questions, and you get to... So this is really no different, except we're not currently eating anything. Which is unusual. For us, because we like a cup of coffee and maybe some Thai food or biscuits and gravy, something. Anyways.
We did that earlier.
Yeah, we did that already today. That's done. We checked that one off the list. But you mentioned something that I found interesting the other day, and I thought it really fit in well to this conversation of embodiment. And so that is like this issue of culture. So some of the reading that I've been doing recently talks about as embodied human beings, we are limited. So they call that limited agency. And something else that I read recently talked about the fact that, culture is kind of like the water that fish swim in. It so envelops us that we can't really understand who we are without taking culture into consideration. And there's a lot about our culture that just becomes really innate in who we are, and we see the world in a very specific way because of our culture. And so you were talking about that the other day, and I thought that'd be kind of a fun conversation to have. You were specifically talking about the fact that we have such a Christian culture in the Western world today. It's very Christian. there's a lot of thought, even if you're atheist or something like that, you just naturally are going to have a lot of Christian thought because of the culture. So,
yeah, I'm going to have to retrace that thread that I had started to develop.
Yeah.
Because I don't exactly remember where I was going with it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I guess in general we could say a lot about, well, maybe just to go into like some examples of not just culture, but something like something that we do like every day that we don't really understand that we're doing and how it affects we visualize or conceptualize things. Mm-hmm. And one of those is like reading. Like, for example, for the Western world, most of the Western world, we read left to right, right? And we don't think anything of it because that's how we're taught, right? But if you go to Asia or something like that, where you're reading right to left or up and down, because I've seen something on this where, like, for example, how do you, when you're visualizing the future and the past, where are they sort of spatially in your mind?
Linear.
Yeah, they're linear, but in which direction?
Right. So
is the future
the
to
past
the right?
would be on my left, and then the future would be on my right.
Right.
Yeah.
So in some of the Asian cultures where they read right to left, the future for them is to the left.
Right.
And the past is to the right. Right? Or up and down, they visualize things differently. Right? There's just one example of something that is so ingrained in us that we just take for granted. And I guess the importance of that is just to understand that it's like one perspective of something. Right. Right. And when we're discussing ideas or concepts like the future or the past or something like that, the way we visualize it affects how we understand it as well.
Yep. So in China, for instance, if you were a Republican, you would be a left-wing conservative.
Right.
Would that be right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was just something that popped in my brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if, I guess, I'm trying to think of where I was maybe going with that idea of...
Well, it's okay.
Because the thing we need to have is like examples, really.
Yeah, it's okay. You don't have to think of exactly where we're going with that. We can have a fresh conversation kind of around that idea today. But, you know, I look at a lot of things, a lot of issues that we deal with in the context of maybe church or outside of church too. And we're fighting a lot of cultural battles within the context of church, especially like some political ones. So people have a very specific view of things that they would even call biblical, but they're actually cultural, political views. They're not biblical views. But in their mind, in their culture, because there are different cultures that also, there's pockets of cultures within the United States specifically. So you have different pockets of cultures. And so there's like truisms within those little pockets. And I find that kind of interesting. And I guess one of the questions, Scout, that I have is so let's say, you know, you're in one of those pockets, right? And you have some really ingrained beliefs. Is there like a precedent for people moving outside of that ever, really? Or is that pretty much, if you're in that pocket and you have this set of beliefs that are very cultural, are you pretty much stuck there? Is there a philosophical answer to something like that?
I don't know if
I know there's a
philosophical answer per se.
Okay.
I mean, just in general, I would say that, if you're never going to expose yourself to any other point of view or culture or microculture or whatever you want to call it, then you're pretty much stuck.
Right.
Because how else would you have any way that something would influence you to see something differently than somebody else's perspective or a different cultural perspective?
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, I mean, if you never leave your hometown, then you don't understand what it's like to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
And how other people live or even how similarly other people live. Right? You might think, oh, all the people from outside of my hometown are crazy.
Right.
They don't live the way we do. We live the right way.
Yeah.
Because you've never been there. You don't know about it.
Yeah.
And then you go there, you sort of have this own idea. You have your own idea about things, right? We imagine the way things are outside ourselves, and like our own little home, our own little town.
Yeah.
But you can't ever know whether that's true or not unless you go there.
Right.
Right. So you can definitely get stuck in that position.
Yeah.
If you never leave, which is probably what a lot of people do. But that we could say that, that's sort of a geographical example
right.
of like, influence. But at the same time, if we don't explore other ideas,
yeah,
right, read other things, that's one way to expose or get influenced by something else and just be able to see that there's more than just maybe the way you see things.
Yeah.
Even to challenge the way you see things, to solidify some of the things that you think about, right? Because we become too comfortable in those and never be challenged.
Yeah.
And we think we really believe this, and then when we're challenged, we're like, well, I can't really back it up.
Yeah.
Right, I say that I believe this, but if you'd actually question me, it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's just kind of an interesting thought because, like I kind of work in the field of change, right? So the idea is transformation. Yeah, that you can change. I'm taking a lot of psychology stuff right now in school, so a lot of that talks about the fact that we don't change, or there's a lot of things about us that we don't even know about. They're a big part of who we are, but chances of changing that are not real good. Let's say it's not likely. I don't know what the odds are, but a lot of times there's some significant things that take place maybe in early childhood or whatever, just different stages of growth that really have a big impact on how we think and how we relate and all these different things. So from a philosophical standpoint, does philosophy address that kind of thing?
Yeah. Aristotle in particular, in his book, The Nicomachean Ethics, when we're talking about ethics and morals and what that encompasses. He has this idea of vice and virtue, and that virtue, as well as vice, are habituated, meaning that the more you do something, the more likely it is that you're going to develop that thing. Right. That goes both ways. So the more you do bad things, the worse kind of person you're going to be, and that reflects in your character. Yeah. Right. So same with virtue, right? The more good things that you would do more often reflects in your character, builds your character. Right. But that also means that it's not something innate. Yeah. Vice and virtue are not something innate, right? They're just good people and they're just bad people. It means that there's room for change. Yeah. Because just as a habit, you can break a habit. Yeah. Right. But it can be harder to break the longer you've had it. Right. Yeah. So there's this idea that you can change it. But he also has this idea that for some people, they go so far down the rabbit hole, of bad habits, vice, that there's a point of sort of no return. Okay. And the way we kind of conceptualize it, we use the word like sedimentation. It's like you sort of solidify into this thing, right? This type of character.
It's like the sediment in the bottom of the pond.
Yeah.
Over time, dust filters in and it floats to the bottom, and it's pretty hard to remove. You got to drain the pond, dig it all out, and so it's an extreme invasive process.
Yeah, it solidifies. Yeah, but there's a whole bunch of factors that play into what kind of habits you develop, right? And so one of the big questions that's in that book is about, or this lecture, because it's sort of a series of lectures, is can we still be good when we suffer horrible misfortune? Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when we suffer horrible misfortune, we end up doing bad things. Right? Because that's the best or the easiest option for us, maybe.
Most comfortable.
Or most comfortable, right?
Yeah.
And he wants to say no, that, really all you have, even in misfortune, is you still have ultimately the choice to do what's right or what's wrong.
Yeah.
And a person with good character can suffer all misfortune, right? And still do what's right.
Okay, Scout. So this kind of makes me think of something. My wife is a teacher. And every once in a while, she'll, take a special interest in a kid. And maybe go above and beyond to try to help them out. And she had one in particular, had really good grades, did well in the ACTs, came from a really difficult situation, hard home life, and had kind of a way out. They were going to get scholarships and those kind of things to college, and they were talking about it, and she was encouraging it, to the best of her abilities, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, what that student was comfortable with took over, and they just went down the same path that they were accustomed to.
Right.
And in Christianity, we deal with this all the time. Like transformation, how does that happen? Does it happen? We kind of evaluate that. And in reality, those cases are kind of few and far between. We don't see a lot of it. It's not like, hordes and hordes of people are just immediately transformed when they come to faith. A lot of times they still kind of wade in the muck of their past, right?
Sure.
So how does philosophy look at that same issue?
Yeah. So for Aristotle, somebody who has, let's say, developed bad character through habituation, right? It would take a lot for them to change. And they couldn't necessarily, they might be able to do it on their own, but really it would come from, the same things that we think about in counseling, where you're talking to somebody who has bad character or is in bad situations. Like, well, you'd have to remove yourself from the friends you surround yourself with, right? Because those people are leading you to do these things, right? It'd be something like that, where you'd have to have good influences around you to help you change. Still, ultimately, for Aristotle, the power to change comes from within you. For Aristotle, right? He doesn't have a conception of something supernatural happening to make that change, which is in contrast to Dante, which I use in one of my classes, where we read Aristotle's Ethics and then we read Dante. And Dante, at the beginning of the Inferno, is in the same situation, where he says he's found himself lost in a dark wood. Yeah. And it's kind of this allegory of finding himself or having awoken to find that he's a bad person, right? And then where does he go from there? And how does he get to whatever his desired goal is? Right. First of all, he has to see, like, well, what is the goal? Like, where does he need to get to? Right. And he ends up coming out of the wood and seeing above at the top of the hill sort of like heaven and God. And that's his destination ultimately. But he can't just run up the hill. He tries to. Yeah. Initially run up the hill to get up there, and he's blocked by 3 beasts. And so he has to kind of turn back. And then he has somebody that appears to him, Virgil, who's this poet, who then guides him and tells him that the way that he has to go to get to the top, to get to heaven, or to get to being basically a good person, right? Virtue, we might say for the Greeks, for Aristotle. Right. The way he has to get there is he has to go actually descend down through hell and then make his way back up. Oh, wow. So anyway, he has a different journey. But the question that we have to ask, and I ask my students too, is it says that he awoke to find himself in a dark wood. Now, how did he awake? Did he wake himself up? Do you ever wake yourself up when you're sleeping? Or how did that happen? Right. When do your eyes open to see reality? Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, for Dante, this whole story is in a way, a combination of Aristotelian ethics and Christian ethics. Mm-hmm. But there is sort of a sharp contrast between who Dante thinks is ultimately in control of that kind of change. And it's not you who makes that initial move. It would be God. It'd be divine intervention. Mm-hmm. Something happens, right? And we're not told how he awakes or why he awakes or anything like that. Yeah. But it's just that he awakes.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's odd. And sort of the only explanation we might have is something awoke him, right? Something woke him up.
Yeah.
And we'd say in this allegory, that to find yourself in a bad character, you don't just all of a sudden, or if you do all of a sudden realize, wow, I'm a terrible person.
Yeah.
Whatever hits you, it doesn't come from within necessarily. It comes from God. And I think that would be a Christian perspective on change as well.
Did Aristotle have a perspective then on that?
On change?
Right. Like, how would Aristotle have viewed you awakening to this reality of who you really are? Or did he have
if you're ultimately, if you're in that position of sedimentation where you can't change, you don't awake.
Okay.
You are just that person.
So he didn't have...
mean, you could definitely change if you're not completely bad.
Right.
Right? But you're not a great person either. Mm-hmm. You're not completely vicious, but you're not, Mr. Wonderful. Mm-hmm. But that would still come from some type of education, right? Like learning about, this is, you could be actually ignorant of some things.
Right.
And just learn that, I shouldn't be doing these things.
So
but it still would not be like a divine intervention.
Right. So we have the idea of hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
And so we look to that often as a moment where people sometimes will awaken.
Yeah.
And we don't know what rock bottom is it's different for everybody.
Right.
But everybody seems to have a rock bottom. And again, it looks different. So would that be, is rock bottom a divine intervention thing, or is that just a purely physical realm thing? Are there any philosophical ideas around that concept, or
around rock bottom?
Yeah, around that idea.
Well, not explicitly, I guess.
Okay.
But we could glean from sort of what we've talked about so far that, if a person does maybe suffer a lot of misfortune, they can see that the thing that they suffer is bad.
Right.
And maybe it's wrong. Yeah. Right. And from that, they learn, even if they're hitting rock bottom at that point, like, I need to change because I don't want this anymore.
Yeah. But now Dante, the example you gave with Dante, he awoke.
Yeah.
And then he was like almost called into rock bottom. Like he had to go through the rough stuff. Like he descended into hell.
Right.
To come back out. So he actually woke up before he technically probably hit rock bottom.
In a way. So what happens is Dante awakes and finds himself in this dark wood, which is nasty, right? It's just imagine like the worst place you could ever be, and you don't want to be there, right? When you wake up, you're like, before he was kind of in a dream, just wandering through this dark wood, right? And then he awakes. Right, we're just kind of continuing with this analogy. And so when he awakes, he finds himself in a horrible place. He wants to get out of there, right? Wherever he can go to get out. So he gets out, and then he sees his destination. He sees this shining sun, the sun at the top of the hill that, represents heaven. Right. Or virtue, and he wants to go there. And so he starts running up the hill, but then he's blocked by these beasts. Well, the beasts turn out to be not just some random animals, but parts of himself.
Okay.
Right. So then when we're talking about a transformation, it's not an immediate thing, like this story is telling us. It's not something that he can just go from being this terrible person to being a virtuous person. Yeah. Right. Or a righteous person in sort of Christian terms. It doesn't happen that quickly. And so because he's blocked by these things that are sort of his main sins, right, or vices, he has to overcome those first. Mm-hmm. And so that's what the journey is for.
Right.
Descending into hell, he sees and goes through and sees the sinners that are condemned for the things that they did.
Yeah.
Which he has, and he does share similar sins or vices with these people. Mm-hmm. And that's supposed to teach him something.
Okay.
Right? To help him overcome them.
Yeah.
Right? To overcome his fear of, sort of some of his fear is one that really sort of keeps him from, I guess, aspiring to something higher, too. And that's like sort of a main thing that he has. He cowers a lot from like going, he's like, oh, I don't want to go down there, you know. And Virgil's, you have to go down there to be able to come up and get to paradise.
Right.
So, I guess when I'm thinking about a transformation for people as well, you know, sometimes we think about it as like getting struck by lightning, you know, and then there's like this immediate change. We might ideally think of it or conceptualize it that way, but it doesn't happen that way.
Right.
And even Dante's trying to sort of explain this or show us that you don't just become a good person in that instant that you recognize that you're a bad person.
Yeah.
Right. And even that, I mean, goes back to Aristotle and what he's talking about, where virtues and vices are habituated. So even if you recognize that you're a bad person, you've developed vices, right? You've developed gluttony, let's say.
Yeah.
Right? You're gluttonous. And so you want to, you know, eat as much as you can because it's pleasurable to you. You can't just stop eating.
Right.
I mean, you could, but it's going to be very, very difficult to just stop. So a lot of times you have to sort of ease your way into it because it's a habit. And to develop the virtue, you know, to be somebody who's moderate and like they're eating, let's say, it takes a lot of practice as well, right? A lot of discipline.
Yeah.
And you have to do that over and over and over frequently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what it is to develop something like a habit.
Yeah. Okay. Or you could download the new map like I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it does it for you.
It does it for me. I have to log what I eat now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, now.
That also requires you to have some self-discipline
I have to have a little self-control.
To go and actually log it in.
Right.
To be accountable.
Yeah.
Like, you can just be like, I'm not going to put that in.
No.
I'll be good.
Yeah, I'm going to skip that. I'm going to pretend that I did not have that meal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And then I'm going to wonder why I didn't make my weight goal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, this thing is bogus. It doesn't work.
Yeah, this doesn't work.
Yeah.